Welcome back to the Connected Realms podcast. This is episode 7, chapter 7 of the book Vampires Are. We are almost finished. So, after a few chapters of examining interviews with supposedly real vampires, this is a chapter to discuss from an academic perspective what the reality might be, and it focuses a lot on humans and blood. Kaplan starts this one off by asking exactly what I've been mulling over for a few weeks now, which is vampires have been around for ages in legends and myth, and we believe in the flesh. These beings, are they human? Are they superhuman? Are they mutants? Could they be from another world? Does blood have strange powers? Well, he said he and his Vampire Research Center definitely mulled over this strong association with blood because that seems to be what the definition of vampire revolves around fundamentally. So if we're defining vampire as a creature or human who drinks human blood in order to keep living, then we should examine how vampires fit into the fabric of our culture and what blood means to us humans on a fundamental level. This is pretty much just a brain dump of all the theories that they've had as they spent all these years examining vampires. So first he goes over blood being the elixir of life. This is obviously just a life force, and if something's going to drain all that from you, it's going to drain your life force from you. We can see a strong connection of this with an energy vampire. They're draining some kind of force from you. I would even connect this with demonic activity. They're draining energy from you by inspiring fear. That's my belief anyway. So vampires are trying to drain blood. Maybe a demon is trying to drain energy. And maybe there are other types of life forces to drain from us, but blood and energy definitely seem to be pretty major. Blood and religion. So he examines here Christianity and the rituals involving blood, especially the Catholic rituals. So I am not a Christian, but if you talk to any Christian or you observe any of the rituals, undoubtedly at some point you're going to encounter this notion of the blood of Christ. And I mean, I have a lot of Christian friends, and something that they do that initially freaked me out and I'm becoming more comfortable with it, but it still gave me pause, was when they're praying for good things to happen or for protection, they pray for the blood of Christ to be all over you or all over your house or all over your children. And the first few times I heard that, I was like, whoa, that's kind of creepy. I still think there's a lot to examine there. Like, if you revere Christ, why pray for the blood of Christ to be splashed upon you? But in my personal life and the personal lives of people around me, there is a strong correlation between prayers involving the blood of Christ and outcomes. And it's funny because, like I said, I'm not a Christian, but I can't deny correlations that seem very real. Kaplan does point out that there's a paradox here with Christianity because there is in the Bible this phrase, the blood is the life, and you shall not eat the life. That is from Deuteronomy 12, 23, 24, 25, 27. And ancient cultures obviously did a lot of ritual sacrifice. They did human sacrifice, animal sacrifice. This is anyone from the Vikings to the Aztecs. Any and every culture almost had their version of bloodletting for the gods. So some of them even unfortunately would sacrifice humans and children because the more pure the sacrifice, the more pleased the god is the belief. I think that's straight up satanic, but that's just me. I don't think our good God wants us to let out the blood of any innocent creature to please him. Blood on our dinner table. I think this is unnecessary, but he focuses more than once in this book on how we humans like to cut into a juicy steak. And when the blood comes out of the steak, we are pleased. I don't like my steak at all red. So I personally think that all of that is kind of gross. But he says, don't we like a bloody cut of meat from the deli? Or have you ever been to Italy where they have desserts and savory dishes involving a lot of blood? So this could be blood sausage, something called sanguinocci, which is a dessert made from blood. I've actually had blood pudding, and I didn't know what I was eating, or else I actually wouldn't have eaten it because the thought of eating blood actually makes me quite nauseated. But it was surprisingly sweet. I'd hate to say that, but it was really, really, really good. And then when I was told afterward what I had eaten, I was like, oh, that was good, but I won't be eating it again. He has a paragraph here about blood and sex, and some of this is obvious and we've already covered it. So there's blood fetishists and things like that. I will be doing a deeper dive into this one. He goes over very briefly who Lilith was. Now, Lilith was a woman who appeared in Sumerian scripture around 2400 BC. She was apparently the first wife of Adam, but got replaced because Adam wasn't happy with her because she was a bit of like a nasty Jezebel demon lady. She was for the streets, is what she was. So he replaced Lilith with Eve, and then this obviously made Lilith very angry. And in something called Legend of the Jews, Lilith drains the very essence of men, and she becomes what Hebrews called and what we still call today a succubus. This is a night demon who visits men and seduces them while they sleep. So Kaplan then goes on to talk about primitive ideas, and he condescendingly calls primitive people those who live at a low-tech level and reason in a childlike way. They have a poetic and imaginative way at looking at death and life beyond. So he just thinks that they're childlike. He doesn't think that they have any wisdom to offer. He thinks that they're silly. He looks down his nose at them. I don't really appreciate that. I think that if you study primitive cultures, obviously they're all different. I do not lump them all into one. They're not a monolith. But especially like Native American cultures, they have a spiritual wisdom and knowing about things that we lost a long time ago. And especially if you look at how some of the old school shamans in South America, for example, when they do ayahuasca, they're combining plants that don't reside together. It's an ancient ritual that they're doing, and they're gaining enlightenment by literally traveling into other realms. Look, I think that they know a lot that we don't know, okay? Like, we lost a lot when we civilized ourselves. Yes, we have a more convenient life now, but I think spiritually we lost a lot. I didn't appreciate how he was condescending toward these people. But he says for them, for the primitive people with the silly ideas, blood was the essential factor in the human sacrifices in ancient Mexico and Peru, always trying to enrich the soil with human blood. Well, this is not very different than other Western religions. So I don't understand why he separates the two, but I'm not going to dwell on it. There are other cultures who, in the inverse, actually believe that blood is not so great and it's kind of dirty. They believe that if you spill the blood on the earth, it threatens anyone who walks on it. In some cultures, women who are menstruating are not allowed to touch the earth with their feet because they don't want the woman to pollute the earth. Okay, moving on to unrelated things. There is a paragraph here about missing blood in New York City. An article from 1978 detailed how 15,000 gallons of blood went missing in 1 year and were never accounted for when it came to blood banks having to get rid of their excess. You can only use it for so long before it expires and you have to throw it out. Well, they were doing this and discovered that 15,000 gallons of blood were missing and unaccounted for and never were found again. What do you think happened? Was it just bad bookkeeping? Was it human error, or is there something more nefarious going on here? Beautification. So then he discusses Elizabeth Bathory. She was a fascinating countess from Hungary. In the 1600s, she was convicted and imprisoned for having killed hundreds of virgins in the village that she presided over. The estimates always vary, but it's anywhere from 300 to 600 young virgin women. She believed she could bathe in their blood, and I think some accounts even have her drinking the blood, and it would keep her youthful. She eventually died in her prison. They are not sure how. Her hands got very cold. She was told by her guard to just go lie down. She did, and then she passed away. Nobody knows quite how she died. I do think that's kind of interesting that once she was taken away from her daily baths of virgin blood, she kind of just withered away and passed away. So that's something I might do a deeper dive into in the future. Briefly, Kaplan goes over the supposition that vampires can't see their own reflections. I think this has been refuted by the fact that everyone he interviewed who seemed to be a legitimate vampire thought that this seemed ridiculous and had no factual basis. But he wants to understand, well, where would this come from in terms of the legends? It could come from some of those more primitive beliefs, in his opinion, because a lot of primitive people actually don't like to look at reflections in mirrors. When Westerners or whatever civilized members of society go and explore primitive cultures and present them with mirrors, they're usually scared or put off and they think that there's some evil essence to it. So maybe there's a connection there, but that's just straight up supposition on the part of Mr. Kaplan. Premature burial theory. So this is Kaplan asking, well, where is the origin of vampires in the lore that they are coming up out of their graves and doing their deeds at night? It could have actually come from the fact that there was this very real trend of people being buried alive, thinking that they were dead, not having the medical know-how to prove that, bury them alive, and then it gets subsequently discovered for some of these corpses, not all of them, that actually they were trying to scratch their way out of their coffin. I mean, horrific. So compound that over years and years and years, and maybe theories start to arise that, hey, if you do that to somebody, maybe they'll rise from the dead and, start drinking our blood and terrorizing our neighborhood. I don't know. Maybe it's one of those things because what you see a lot with cryptids, if you look at cryptids all over the country and all over the world, there does seem to be a heavy tie in with trying to teach the local society a lesson and discourage them from doing something bad. So, for example, the theory of Wendigo exists because they were trying to discourage people from eating people, from being cannibals. If you eat someone in those cultures, you become a Wendigo, and that's a horrific way to exist. There are many, many, many other examples of this. So perhaps they started saying, hey, if you bury someone alive, they're going to come back as a vampire and kill all of us. I mean, I think that that would scare a medical practitioner back then into actually making sure that someone was truly dead before they buried them. So that gives food for thought. Cryogenics in vampires. Interestingly, if you want to pursue a cryogenic future, which you can, you have the freedom to do so, to ask them to freeze you on the off chance that one day they might bring you back to life. What they first do is remove all the blood from your body and replace it with some kind of chemical preservative. And this is where it gets like really academic, right? And this is where academics can lose me. I like to keep one foot on the ground of common sense and my head sort of in the cloud of the ethereal. But academics live in kind of a different universe. They kind of like just make up these wild theories that sound good because they've been living in their books for too long, but they don't really like go out, touch grass, and make sure it's in accordance with common sense. So this is what I mean. He's talking about cryogenics. Then he immediately leads into how this could be a misunderstanding of information from the biblical times when Jesus said that in the future the dead will rise and walk with the living. And he asks, could this possibly be a reference to cryogenics told as a parable as Jesus often taught his lessons? I don't even know how you get there. Stuff like that is perplexing to me. Like, where is your mind going with this? How are you possibly connecting 21st century weirdo psycho technology? I think it's quite strange technology to ask for your head or your whole body to be frozen like Walt Disney style, so that one day maybe some scientists can bring you back to life like a Frankenstein or something. I don't understand where that's tying in with vampires. I don't understand where that's tying in with the Bible and with Jesus saying that the dead will rise and walk with the living. I feel like the interpretation of that biblical phrase is a lot more simple. And Kaplan, I guess how he's trying to justify this is, how would you explain an airplane to a primitive aborigine? Trying to simplify it, you might just call a plane a big bird which men could ride in. This would be in the frame of reference of the primitive person, and he could relate to it. Now imagine trying to explain cryogenic preservation of a human body for future revivifying to people whose technology consisted of horse-drawn chariots and who had never heard or even dreamed of chemically induced freezing of tissue. A master such as Jesus Christ, who had precognition of such future accomplishments, could very well likely have attempted to explain this complicated subject in a simple way. That's retarded. I'm sorry. I really appreciate this book. I really appreciate this author and all the work that he's done, but sometimes this is what academics drive me nuts with. That's just retarded. I'm sorry. And now I'm going to have to put this damn channel on Rumble because now I'm saying retarded and I'm talking shit about politicians and how they're probably blood-sucking reptilians. Yeah, I'm going to have to put this on Rumble. Okay, so yeah, like that was like a totally weird tangent that Kaplan went on in this chapter that I don't really appreciate because I got to the end of it and I still have no idea how he's tying the concept of, living forever via having a soul to being a vampire and cryogenic freezing. It's batshit, okay? It's batshit. Speaking of batshit, we're moving on to the rabid bat theory. I already went into this myself. I won't do overkill, but if you pair the visual reality of bats, which are fanged creatures with wings, and they drink blood, and they live in caves and they only come out at night. If you pair that with rabies, which is a horrifying brain disease that makes you want to bite people. See, this is where an academic person is making sense to me. This makes sense. Like the anemia in the first chapter made a lot of sense. So it's easily understood how rabid bats, if they're terrorizing villages in older civilizations, obviously you can start to come up with some lore and legend that makes a ton of sense. So then he's just like rapid fire spitting out like little one sentence quickies here. Are babies vampires? They certainly spend the first part of their life just eating the blood and life force from mom via a tube. Vampires might be extraterrestrial beings. Maybe they stay hidden for a long time like Loch Ness Monster. How did Elizabeth Bathory take her blood baths? Because blood clots very quickly. So was she just bathing in like a bloody type of jello? Hey, I mean, maybe. The replacement of blood. This is interesting because an interesting question that I saw posed on Reddit was, hey, if vampires really are drinking enough blood from a human body to sustain them every single day, like, are they killing people every single day? What does the math look like on that? If we have some vampires living among us, doesn't that add up to like an extreme amount of dead bodies? Well, maybe they don't have to kill them. If they have willing donors, a healthy blood donor replaces a pint of blood within a few days. Now, the question I ask is, could a healthy blood donor donate to a vampire and replace their own supply in enough time to have this be a regular occurrence? I don't really think so. I guess the question to answer, which has not really yet been answered, is how much blood do they need to survive every day? Do they need a body's worth of blood? That seems like quite a lot. Or do they just need a few pints? If they just need a few pints, okay, perhaps they cycle through some willing human donors. If they need a whole body's worth, I don't think that that seems feasible because I don't think that people can produce and replace it enough to keep them satiated in a way that's practical in terms of cycling through people who are agreeing to this and staying alive. The aging process, there are very interesting questions to ask here regarding blood drinking and the aging process. Look, I already ranted about this in a previous chapter, but it has already been admitted and proven that the so-called elite, who I call parasites, and maybe they are actually vampires, weirdos like Bill Gates and Nancy Pelosi and all these people who are just crazy and they're powerful and they keep just living and living and living. And celebrities who stay very youthful looking, I mean, obviously with the help of Botox, but also with the help of blood. They have admitted that they get blood transfusions regularly from healthy teenagers or people in their very early 20s. So there has to be something to the concept that getting blood in you via transfusion or ingestion could lead to either prolonged life or prolonged youthful appearance. This leads into the question of whether a vampire could feasibly live for hundreds or even thousands of years and still maintain an appearance like a human. I mean, we have historical examples such as Count of Saint Germain and then Jacques Saint Germain, which I will be covering separately in probably a New Orleans piece on vampires. But yeah, if you look at those historical examples, those are people who seem to stop aging completely around like 35 to 40 years old in terms of their appearance. It is evident that maybe they have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years because they can kind of almost prove it. I don't know what this means, but Kaplan says a scientist had contacted them and believed that a long-chain fatty alcohol known as triacontanol sustained certain metabolic processes which may be responsible for the unique characteristic of vampires, such as their exceptionally long lifespan and their outstanding strength and endurance. Nobody says here how you obtain this alcohol, whether it is organic or not organic, whether it is present in everyone or just some people. They don't really expound upon it. All he really says here is maybe it contributes to the aging process or lack thereof with vampires. Okay, that concludes this chapter. I will spend the bulk of the next chapter summarizing the entire book and what my ideas on vampires now are after having read this whole book, pairing it with the other research that I've been doing outside of this book. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.